All right, good evening, everyone. My name is E.R. Anderson. I'm the executive director of Charis Circle. Charis Circle is the nonprofit programming arm of Charis Books, and Charis Books is the South's oldest independent feminist bookstore. We're so excited to be here tonight with Taylor Byas in conversation with Aurielle Marie for a celebration of I Done Clicked My Heels 3 Times poems. These poems are inspired by The Wiz. This debut is a full-length collection celebrating Southside Chicago and a Black woman's quest for self-discovery, one that pulls her away from the safety of home and into her power. We're really, really excited. I'm first going to introduce Aurielle Marie, who is the author of Gumbo Yaya, which is, of course, also available at Charis. Gumbo Yaya was the winner of the 2021 Furious Flower Prize. Aurielle is also the 2020 Cave Canem Poetry Prize winner and the 2019 Plowshares Emerging Writers Award. She lives in Atlanta, Georgia, on unceded Muskogee land. Taylor Byas, the person of the hour, is a Black Chicago native currently living in Cincinnati, Ohio. She is the first place winner of the 2020 Poetry Superhighway, the 2020 Frontier Poetry Award for New Poets Contest, and the 2021 Adrienne Rich Poetry Prize. She is the author of the chapbooks Bloodwarm and Shudder, but the book that we are here to celebrate tonight is her debut full-length collection. Again, that's I Done Clicked My Heels 3 Times, poems. So we are so happy to be here with all of you, both in person and virtual. For our virtual friends, if you would like to ask a question, you can put it in the chat at any time, and I will vocalize it when the time comes. And for y'all who are physically with us, if you would like to ask a question, please just raise your hand when the time comes and I'll bring you the mic because we want to make sure everybody can hear you. But without further ado, I'm going to kick it over to Aurielle Marie to get us going.
Oh, hey. Yay! Thank you so much. And thank you to Charis for hosting this space and always doing it up for Black and brown writers, for queer and femme writers, all the / quotation other writers, and creating hollow space for us to talk tenderly about these dynamic works. Speaking of which, can we just do a round of applause? Because this book and Taylor, this is just a phenomenal text, and I'm so excited. It's been so amazing to watch you just like create work over the past couple of years and get into editing and just do the damn thing. So we're gonna read a little bit, talk a little bit. Taylor's gonna come back and read to close us out, and then promise I'm gonna have my timer because y'all know I got ADHD and I'm a Sag and I'm Southern, so I love to talk. But there will be time for questions at the end. Yeah, so I'm gonna open because I'm gonna do this and then get out the way so y'all can really just be in awe with me. Of I Done Clicked My Heels 3 Times. So I'm gonna read these 2 and then get out y'all's way. This 1. I said 1. That's right.
You can give us 2.
Don't tell me that. Okay. I love the way that I Done Clicked My Heels 3 Times. Okay, I'm not gonna cry. I Done Clicked My Heels 3 Times honors the femme bloodline and the women who are in a variety of ways touching on, your the authors, the speakers, experience and creating lineage. And so I'm carrying with me today Tisha Thompson Bynum, who passed yesterday, my best friend's mother. And there's a poem in the book that talks about all of the mothers who bring forward Black girls and Black femmes. And so I'm going to read this in her honor. The name of the poem is Independent. Her mama was a grocery gangster, could feed her kids with leather and broth. The swollen meat of her right hand, her mama fooled us. Her mama filled us, a witch of water and salt, Oh, what terrible magics. And I too healed my younger self at her feet. For the touch, a hymn of her sweat, a feast. But it wasn't enough to sing the dew from the ground into a cast iron. She made that last meal stretch for 2 weeks, made into the stickiest stuff, the stuff of legends, the tricks of saints. And I knew better than to ask for money or things I wanted and did not know better than wanting. And she taught us what we ain't have is to want them. And us at 16, the men who too wanted and did not want to be seen in their aching, but did so desire us, girls and gargoyles, found themselves wandering our thighs, desire, thirsting like deserts for want. I found them and earned my broth with a slick boil of sweat. Her mother said, whatever, what you learned. I thought my hips could do a magic thing at 16, young witch of water and sulfur, our mothers first, our mamas sisters, our sisters mamas, born of desire and a desire to never want for what we could not craft in our own hands. Okay, I'll do one more. Shout out to The Wiz. It's a great movie. You know,
Do it. You were second guessing it. Do it.
but it's sad.
We'll be okay.
We'll be okay.
We'll be okay.
All right. I'm in, the throes of like remembering and mourning, but remembering with joy and all right. This is Igungun, which is a term that just means ancestor, those who are holding place and making space for us on the other side of the veil. If there is such a place where the dead walk and there is no mourning, I am sure you are there, brother. I am sure you are eating pork rind and dancing windmills round the niggas we first met in Grandma's good book. Wild thing, I bet they call you. I bet you can't hear them over the tender sound of a djembe flirting with your hips. Even there, where the time don't stop, I am sure you run late to everything. I am sure nobody minds when you flash them that sun-swallowed mouth, that unhinged glow. Brother, I bet you if there is such a thing as God, maker of the most trill dance floors, he who rules the true indigo, Elohim who calls the water into puddle, into flood, into those tears carving my face, I know you've renamed him my nigga, have called him AOG down the long hallway full. I am sure he answers with a smile each time. Your voice swallows him in mischief and praise. I imagine your shoulder wet in the twilight of this third space, this not hell, not earth, this heaven by another name, God's head resting gently there. His body, the tremble of wailing, now subsided, and you, a crooner and been one always. You sing him your favorite songs in the key of life. You let God unfasten his whole self before he goes back to being almighty. And the magic of it is, you ain't no angel. You ain't. You just you out there being light. Once, when you knew you were dying, you told me to rest my head on your chest and listen. And I know it's silly to call the heart a drum, considering, but damn, if it wasn't music, my love, what was it? Thank you for letting me bring that into the space. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
And now we are going to hear from Taylor reading from I Done Click My Heel, not once, not twice, but 3 goddamn times. I've been waiting to say that.
Wait for this moment. Thank you for reading, for being here. Thank you to Charis again for hosting, and thank you to all of y'all who are here with us, both in person and online. It means the world to me. And none of this stuff is possible without y'all. So thank you. As Aurielle knows, and I'm sure we'll talk about, a lot of this book is about form. And so, there's a sonnet crown about the South Side of Chicago that ultimately ended up being broken up and spread out throughout the book. But the first sonnet of that crown opens the collection. So I just want to start there and read the first South Side. So for the South Side of Chicago and all of my family who are still there. South Side 1. This is what teaches me love. Your streets, they're wailing for the dead. The way a siren becomes a mother too. How my parents hold me like some frail thing to their chests at night. How quick they are to cover my ears when the block gets hot. The handshake, half hug, sacred enough to make a man feel whole again. The shape-shifting, how what looks like a thug in darkness softens into a boy in the gold glow of a bedside lamp. How we are all somebody's grandbaby. Harold's chicken steeped in so much hot sauce the nose runs, and the small piece of bread too wet to hold drowning beneath the fries, each of our brownstones side by side, so there's nowhere to run, nowhere for us to cry. And then I will go, before we get into conversation, I'll leave this one for the end. Everybody in the room seen Kill Bill? Great, perfect. Love this for us. So as you know, those movies are exceptionally violent, and they always get me thinking about violence against Black women, but then also just like childhood witnesses of violence against each other. And so this Kill Bill scene has me thinking about weave and girl fights. The camera lingers for a moment on the black flame of Oren Ishii's hair in the snow, just sheared by the bride Tottori Hanzo, and I think about what it means to draw hair in a fight, to hitch a braid or a track from another woman's scalp. What would our grandmother say if they knew we'd forsaken the old proverbs, "Where's my Vaseline?" or "Bitch, hold my earring"? These days, victory depends on grip strength, how well we crook our nails beneath the cornrows, how much we loosen the black thread holding the extensions, the strength of the first tug, drag distance, the size of the hole the asphalt eats into the other girl's jeans. Somebody yells out, "World Star," starts recording, and the crowd's collective flash is hot as stage lights. Someone's nose is knuckled to spit in blood, a lip bellies around a cut, a Black girl's bruises gray under white light. And when the girls are pulled apart, pieces of themselves left behind on the other's shirt like Oren's slit of blood and Winter's fresh down, the judges must decide on a loser. The phones record a tracking shot to the clump of hair or braids on the pavement. Zoom in. The cameras linger on the weave yanked from owner and updo, and the crowd's uproar is something like exit music. But we know this is no samurai's death. No one lives this down.
Thank you. Yeah. It's so easy to get lost in the cadence, in the tenor of your work, and so what a gift. So thank you for bringing that into the space.
Oh, thank you.
All right, y'all ready?
Yeah, let's go.
Okay, cute. We're gonna get into it. All right. So the hard thing about my position today is that we don't have 4 hours, because the questions that I wrote down while reading, I'm like, I want answers to all of these. So I'm gonna just have to text whatever we don't get to
great.
you.
Perfect.
And then we'll just like make somebody publish it.
Mm-hmm.
Cute.
Mm-hmm.
So first of all, I think, I understand in the exploration of I Don't Click My Heels, the usefulness of the whiz as motif. I'm just so curious about that connection and where was it born and how you utilize, like what inspired like the way that you utilize the whiz to kind of communicate your Chicago, your exploration of gender and violence and love. Like how did the whiz become this for you?
Yeah. I think writing this book and so much of this book is just about like family. And so watching The Wiz is like a tradition, a family tradition, and I think a larger cultural tradition as well, to just know that movie so well. But I also think that I didn't really start thinking about Chicago in this way until I left it. And I think there's something about The Wiz and that storyline of not being able to truly see the self, not being able to truly understand where you come from until you're kind of forced away from it.
Yeah.
And in Birmingham in particular, I was constantly confronted by not only what people thought about Chicago, but what people automatically would think of me when I said I was from Chicago, which I think then started to reframe my own understanding of where I was from. And so I think those things came together in that way. And then in the editing process, we were like, how do we want to structure this book? And one of the most crucial, and I think one of my favorite things about the movie is the music, the way that the music kind of carries us through, the way they serve as kind of like chapters for us writers, the way that we think about things. And so then we were like, well, let's use the music as a way to kind of move through the book. And so it became this way of me thinking about home in real time, and then also kind of like an organizing structure for the book as well. So it's working on 2 levels.
Yeah, that's really dope. I actually I love The Wiz in a I think it's not novel, the connection that you have as a Black kid to that story, especially as you get older and understand it as a retelling of the story, a yanking and reclaiming of a story and being told in a new way. And so when I saw the motif and how it, of course, moved through the book, and then when I saw the way that you structured the sections, I actually went and played those songs in that order. And the retelling, like the understanding of I Don't Click My Heels, like the story arc, I was like, okay, write a stage play. Like I'm ready. It was just really gorgeous. And I'm applauding and just in awe of like the use of music to move, even though the musicality of The Wiz wasn't like directly in the work. I think that it was just really effective. And so I was nosy and I wanted to know more.
Thank you for playing the songs as well.
Yeah. Any excuse.
Yeah.
You can't win. Don't get me started. This will turn into a sing-along, and that's not what you signed up for. So handwriting. Yeah. Yes. So birthright in the book, and birthright in a number of ways. I think that you talk about the bestowing of gender performance in the book. You talk about violence as it is passed and alchemized in your Chicago in the book. And I'm thinking about the, birthright, particularly as it's talked about in, I don't know if this is necessarily a Black thing, but especially under a patriarchal society, like birthright is something that we see men, talk about, legacy and lineage and birthright being something that, men exchange and exclude women from. And so I wonder if you could just talk more about how you understand your situation, like how you are situated inside of gender, how you are situated inside of your understanding of violence as a birthright, and how that worked in the poems.
Yeah. So I think the media will like to tell you how violent Chicago is.
Yeah.
And I mean, of course, it's a very tender place for me. It raised me. But there are parts of that that have truth to them. There's a poem in here about a bullet that comes through our window, which did happen, and we did have to move. And so there are these ways that we quite literally are just raised in the danger zone, like in the crossfire. And then there's the more personal layer of my dad, who is very present in this book. I talk about his alcoholism and how it sort of shifted the dynamic of my family, and how as a result I became like the second mother figure, which of course the labor of taking care of others, of raising younger siblings, those sorts of things are already these gendered forms of labor, which I was just, I think, doubly forced into due to my father's violence. And I think there are ways that my father follows me, and there are things from him that I inherit that I think this book was an attempt to like accept those parts of my father that continue to show up in my life now and in my relationships. So I think like the very act of writing this book and being back in this book now are just like acts of relearning to love the self. And those parts of me that I think were harder to love before. Because of that.
I think it's so, I mean, we had touched on this if we haven't talked about it outright, but just like the idea of the father being present in the work, and how we as daughter parents talk in the poem about that relationship. I think it's just really tender and brutal and honest. And what was your process to kind of address the father as both a motif, but also as your real ass daddy in the work? And how to take me through like what, were there forms that stuck out to you? Were there that were like, that could like elaborate on the relationship, or was there just like, images? Like, how did you wrestle with that on the page?
Before even this, so writing with my dad, it always ends up in long forms.
Because child, we got shit to say.
I always have so much to say. And so even before this book, I first wrote an essay about my dad, because and then I think once I got some of that out, I was able to like condense it a little bit more. So it's kind of like you get parts of it out, and then you can kind of whittle down over time. But I think the most he shows up in this book, which I will read sort of at the end, is in the Sestina, which is the longest form sort of in here. But I think that poem in particular was a practice of me just really trying to understand. I was just like, what is it about this life? What is it about the alcohol that keeps you away, that keeps you from family, that keeps you from making the better decision to keep us, right? And so it was like, well, what if I just got into the head of the drunken person? Like, what if I tried to? And so it was like the persona poem that came out of that. And I think that is probably the closest I've gotten on the page to really making him human, which I think had to be a larger project of the book. Like, I think when we write about people who are still alive and still capable of picking up the book and reading what we've said about them, it's important to make sure that they're human. Like, this isn't Disney. We don't do the all good, all evil. And so that was also something I had to grapple with, was like, how do I talk about this truth in my experience while still trying to understand him as a complicated human with his own past and his own wounds that he's dealing with.
It's so funny because the Sestina almost lends itself towards like holding the both and holding the like D, all of the above. And you and I have talked a lot about form, and a lot about how particularly Black femme biographical work gets kind of reduced, and the technicality of it reduced. And I was so excited. What I'm taking a long time to say is I have so many questions about form, but I wonder if we could just start with, how, there's so much rigor in I done clicked my heels 3 times. And so I'm wondering, like, did you set out to make this a form heavy book? Was it petty, or was it just like a self challenge? Was it both? Like, how did, you know, in the early days of the book, of the work, when you realized, oh, this might be, you know, a collection, when did form become a part of the process?
Form is always a part of the process.
Period.
So I'll say it was petty, it was a self challenge, and I'll add a third thing. Petty in the sense that, like, you know, Black femmes writing in the form is, I think, one of the greatest sort of disruptions of the canon that are happening. I think about the history of us writing in form and how it used to be this way that we had to kind of prove ourselves to be, you know, literary, capable of writing in the genre, in the form. And so to now do it, and to do it about Chicago, and to do it about Black womanhood, feels like a very wonderful metaphorical middle finger.
Period.
Self-challenged because I think oftentimes I just have so much to say when I get to the page. I think form really forces me to get to the heart of the thing. It's a container that you can kind of sort through it and get to what you're trying to dig into. And so I think form also just really helped me to get to the heart of a lot of what I was feeling when writing this book. And then the third thing is I am very much invested in changing the way we teach poetry.
Okay.
And I know form is where a lot of people tend to start when we teach form. And honestly, I'm a little over Shakespeare. Love him.
Can we talk about it?
But I think, especially when thinking about the kids now and sort of what they respond to and what keeps them engaged, I think having forms that talk about things that they are familiar with, that they can relate to, that use language that they recognize, can change the way that they see and understand poetry much earlier. And I hope that this book is a part of that mission.
I love that. So it was a little bit of Toni Morrison's write the book you want to read.
Period.
But, like, you know, write the book that you want to learn from, maybe. And then also, y'all gonna put some respect on Black femme formulas. And also let me see how far I can utilize this to my, you know, advancement through, like, my work, my relationship to poetry.
Like, I put 3 sonnet crowns in here. I was insane.
You did. No, I wasn't going to say anything.
No, you can say
I was going to be
polite about it.
But ahead. What were you thinking?
I wasn't.
Okay.
I wasn't. Yeah.
And that was it purposeful? Was it like, okay. Yeah, you already said yes. But I guess what I mean is, when you look at all the way, like, how would you rank the rigor in I done clicked, I'm going to keep saying not 1, not 2, but 3, but I done clicked 3 times. How would you rank, like, the things that are being rigorous in the book? Is form at the top? Is it form and then?
She's rigorous. She's
a rigorous girl.
She's a rigorous.
She's working
girl.
hard.
She's a rigorous.
She's
girl.
working very hard.
And the thing is, for all my writers in the room, y'all know that publishing is. And so one of the really fun things has also been to, like, have written this book years ago now. And to have, like, evolved and do the things that you do as a writer.
Yes. And
then to come back to this book and realize how much form was in it.
Yeah.
Which I think I had just kind of forgotten.
Yeah.
And so coming back to this book with kind of like a fresh set of eyes, especially because the second project is so prose heavy. Like, it's like 70+% prose.
Not some tea on the second project. Only here, folks.
Resting bitch face out 2025. But that's so prose heavy, and so to come back to this 3 sonnet crowns and all the things that I was doing here.
Christina.
Villanelle. There's a Villanelle in
there
here.
Is a Villanelle. There's. I should have kept it. I should have wrote.
There's like a Jeopardy poem.
There's a Jeopardy poem. There's a
She's doing a lot. And so it's
a single mom who works 2 jobs, who loves her kids and never stops.
Yeah,
she's a survivor.
She's a survivor. She is. She's rigorous. Yeah, and I love it.
That's amazing. Yeah. Shout out to the hardworking books. I guess all of the. That's another conversation. That's a conversation for when there's not a mic in front of my face. You're not gonna get me, Taylor. So, I just really just didn't want to read my own notes. I was too excited and maybe over caffeinated. So you are I won't call you an academic because I've never heard you self-identify as that, but you are a doctor, Taylor Byas. You are a PhD holder. You are a editor. You are working on a anthology too. Right. Yeah, your books were hard because so do you. 2 anthologies. And I am curious about with this project in particular, how your rigorous praxis in poetics affected the editing of the book. What did that, especially with the form? Did we start at form? Did we start like today I'm writing a villanelle, or was it ideas on a wall? Take me through
the picture,
the editing process.
When it comes to form, I almost always start in the form. Okay. To be quite honest,
Taylor intimidates me.
No.
Do you know how brave and courageous you have to be like, and today is a Sistina day. I like stumble drunkenly into my form. I'd be like,
real.
Is that bitch?
But that scares me though. That's
okay.
Like our brains work so differently. I don't understand how you could stumble into it. I'm like, that's ADHD. Crazy. Okay. But I typically will start in the form. Okay. I don't know if y'all were like watching my Twitter page in April, but like we did the Poem a Day.
Yes, you did.
And it was all form.
Okay.
And we tortured ourselves.
Yeah, I tried.
Yeah. So that's kind of what form looks like. I come to the page, I know what the form is going to be, and I just kind of like will wrestle with the page until I get to where I need to go. But overall, I think because of all the rigor, all the things that I'm doing, and then also just like the world being on fire, I've had to become more and more comfortable with letting the poems come to me.
Yeah.
And that's been a journey. I was writing a lot when I came into my PhD program. And then over time, my whole writing process just kind of changed. So now I'm more of a collector of things as I sort of go through everyday life. And then eventually enough things will start talking to each other. And that's when I know a poem is asking me to be written.
It's calling you to the page.
It's calling me to the page.
And you'd be like, girl, come here.
Yeah.
Come on.
Yeah.
Let's get started. Yeah, that's real. That's beautiful. So we got like 3 more, and I'm gonna just let them talk to you because this is feeding me. And if I wasn't talking to you, I'd be taking notes. What are you most excited about in this book? Like, do you have a favorite? I hate when people ask me what my favorite poem is. I'll be like, I kind of hate all of them. But is there a part of this book that you're most proud of or most excited about? And why?
I have 2 poems that feel very tender to me.
Yeah.
Sorry, Dad, but it's a Sistina about him. I think that was the hardest poem in the book to write.
Yeah.
But I think it also is one of the poems that like feels emotionally strong, like one of the strongest poems emotionally for me.
I mean, it is a banger.
Thank you. Yeah. But and then I think the final poem of the book, which I think is the very last poem that I also wrote for the book as well.
Oh wow.
So much of this book and this journey has been about relearning kind of what love looks like.
Yeah.
And that poem always just makes me emotional when I read it. And those are the 2 that I will sort of read to close out as well. But I
was gonna ask.
Yeah.
It's gonna be like, so that's where we're
that's where we're gonna end. But.
And with those pieces, I mean, with those 2, which I think I had to kind of with the Sistina, and maybe my bias is I stumbled up. Bias. Okay. All right. It's because you smiled. I was gonna let it go. No. But maybe my own little bias is that I'm reading through the text, right? And I'm like, okay, this is about the father. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, it's a Sistina. And I'm like, wait, I wrote a Sistina about mine.
Yeah.
Like, oh my God.
Yes. A very fantastic Sistina.
Likewise. Twins. American siblings. How did you? So the Cecina form is so like it's such a knuckly, like the lines could be as long. You could do. It's just kind of the thing where you have to discipline. It's really a disciplined form, even though it kind of seems like wee, and that's the hard part. With that piece and any of the other pieces that you feel really like fond of, how did you know when to stop? Like, how did you know this is ready? We're leaving this here.
Yeah, I think in general, I know to leave a poem the hell alone when there's nothing else for me to cut.
Okay.
Like when everything feels necessary.
When it's tight.
When I'm like, the poem is not gonna stand without this thing.
Okay.
Because I tend to like write more than what I need, and I'm always sort of cutting down. So when I get to that point where I'm like, oh, can't get rid of this. Like the poem needs this. That's when I know I'm like, okay, I've said everything that I need to say. Nothing is extra here. Like, let it go.
Yeah.
Let it be in the world.
Yeah. It's so satisfying to hear. It's not about me, but it's so satisfying to hear that you are like, let's do excess and excess and excess, and then let's cut away, isn't serving the poem. Because I think that I am biased. I'm not going to pretend like I'm not, but I think that shows up that like the proof is in the pudding. You get to the richness in the way that the poems land and how those your last lines be lingering. Them last lines. Y'all, who's read the book? Who's done with the book? Anybody done yet? See, you could have lied. You could have been like, yeah, babe. I wasn't about to start quizzing you. You didn't know, though. You didn't know. That's fair. You didn't know. You were like, girl, what's on page 74? Right. But those last lines, I think like once I was done with the book, I was like, feel like that was the thing that lingered. And I think that is like a testament to kind of like the cutback process. I don't know. I kind of saw your brain working. Maybe that's just from talking with you and knowing you and having a little bit of inside scoop. But that's also just, it's really beautiful how like them scissors is sharp. You know exactly what to go in and get and what to leave alone. Shout out to you.
Thank you.
I was gonna ask you questions about Chicago, but I feel like you're on tour right now, and I really feel like, especially them like, no shade, them like academic white folks who like be like, and tell me about the Chicago. I feel like you're gonna get a lot of questions about Chicago, and we got 4 minutes left. So are we okay to not?
Yeah.
Okay, because we love Chicago down.
Love her.
Placemaking, world building,
character,
sight as motif.
Period.
Rigor in the retell of the thing that the world uses as villain. Theory. MFA. PhD.
Period.
Thank you, Chicago. The question that no, because when you're on tour and then everyone's gonna be like, so tell me about Chicago, and you're like, baby, read the book. I did. I did a couple. So I didn't want to get on your nerves tonight because and then I want this question. I want some juice in this. So I'm working on a collection of essays about.
Yes.
An essay collection. That's it. I did not have coffee today. About a lot of things, but mainly about failure and the utility and like the necessary, not like it's this like negative like thing, but like the utility, the usefulness, and like the beauty of failure, especially as like Black femmes who are like, failing in the world inherently as we come into it. And I'm wondering if there's so much success in this book. There's so much glory in this book. And I'm just wondering if there's a moment where you're like in your process or in your like in the curation of the work and the editing, like if you have an experience of failure and how did that serve the book?
Yeah.
Or just like in general in your this is like book number 3 of I think there's 6 already, either done or almost.
6 done. Yeah. If you're counting anthologies.
Shout it up. Give it a round of applause. She works hard. So the 6, yeah.
Ooh, failure. Well, I think just on on a page level.
Yeah.
Being comfortable with failure, which is hard, you know, with our like perfectionist selves. And I think as poets, you know, we kind of are perfectionists by trade.
Yeah.
I think getting comfortable with failing allowed me to write more honestly. I think the fear of like coming to the page and getting it wrong, fear of coming to the page and like not getting it right the first time limited me. And I would always come to the page with like a particular poem or story in mind.
Especially with form.
Especially with form. You like you have this way that you want to tell it.
Yeah.
And it's like never the right way.
Yeah.
Like the way we think we're gonna tell the story or write the poem, it's like never the right way when we first come to the page. And so I think just allowing the page to humble me has been a really hard, but necessary practice of just, you know, learning how to let the poem tell me what needs to happen and just following the instinct. But you know, this book was not this book at first. When I first submitted, or when I first gave it to my agent was like, and we so the first version of this was completely different. It had a lot of poems that didn't make it in here. And for a long time up until that point, I was so convinced that was the book. Yeah. And so that was like, oh. So then I had to sort of rethink and reconfigure the entire book, which I did with my agent. And then we saw the book, and then my editor was like, no. And so we then rearranged the entire book, and that's when the sections came in and all that. So then like there have just been, you know, multiple times where people are going to be like, let's think about this some more. And in the moment it's like, damn. But you know, at the end it becomes this. And so those failures and those no's were necessary for this book to be what it was.
Shout out to the no's.
Shout out to the no's.
Ouch, but thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, appreciate it.
Yeah, that was amazing. Thank you. And lastly, and I'm finishing right on time. Shout out to me. Lastly, favorite song from The Wiz.
Ooh.
And correlating poem to that song, like song that I should listen to and then go read book poem. Okay. We got because I edited while I asked it to you.
Let me find the poem that I want. Okay, so first of all, Emerald City Sequence. Yeah, you got to be seen green to show that your stuff is.
And then the girl who walks by, she's like, ooh,
yeah,
decadent, just
wouldn't be caught dead.
Red.
Yeah, absolutely. She gives it to us every time.
Glory.
And in that section is my favorite poem in that section, Yellow Dress.
Yeah,
Beyoncé. That poem helped me get into some rage. That I think I needed for this book and otherwise. So that's my favorite poem in that section.
Okay, amazing.
Yeah,
amazing. Thank you so much. Did you hear that Renaissance is supposed to be like a musical retelling of The Wiz? You hear that theory?
See, now I gotta get it. Now I gotta.
It's
get
on
my
Reddit.
people to call
I'm gonna send you the
Beyonce.
link. I read it and I deep dived, and then I was like, I'm gonna just.
You should. We gotta get in contact.
We gotta talk about it.
Yeah.
Okay. Cute.
Great.
Well, that concludes my questions. I'll clap it up for Taylor. I'm gonna have. We are excited to hear these two glorious, dense, rigorous, work hard Reba entire poems, and then we'll open it up for questions from everybody.
Okay.
All
right. I'll close us out with the two poems I mentioned earlier. The first is the Sistina drunken monologue from an alcoholic father's oldest daughter. My friends say I should have been a therapist, and it ain't funny no more. I ain't seen $1 of pay for this labor, all my pretending. Who do I see about my check? My father says, I just need somebody to talk to when he calls. He's sitting in our house alone, looking at old pictures and drinking. I still love my wife. And if I answer the phone, I gotta be the mother he missed out on as a kid. I pick up and I gotta turn on a mother's softness, but I ain't gave birth to nothing. Never felt that funny feeling of my second self latching on to the first. How do you love something that looks right through you? You gotta pretend. Act like you understand. My father says, I spent Christmas alone for the first time in my life, and man, I swear somebody needs to give me an Oscar for the way I sounded like somebody's mama. Said, God gonna work it out. But I know my mother did the right thing. Left him. My brother and sister were alone with him for hours while she was gone, and I just felt funny about it. In the way my father would call me pretending he was the victim when I knew what it really was. Maybe we all love the chaos a little bit, having a place to put the blame. Maybe I loved the way they needed me, but I ain't loved the pressure. Somebody told me that I was the glue that held it all together. Now I gotta pretend that's a compliment. I gotta ha-ha and hee-hee when they call me Mother 2.0. I laugh and say, I don't even need kids anymore. But what's so funny about that? A hatred that spreads to the womb. I've had a lot of alone time to wonder about the choices my father makes. Being alone over rehab, over family. Sometimes I say that motherfucker don't love me to myself in the mirror real tough. And I keep saying it until it's funny, until I'm laughing, and then I'm crying, and then I sound like somebody dying when I start coughing from both. Sometimes I ask my mother what happened to him. She just says, it's sad. Most times I pretend I feel the same and I on the phone, but this time I can't pretend no more. I say, Mama, I know you feel bad for leaving him alone, but it was the right thing to do. I say you did what any mother would have done. I say the kids know you did it out of love, to protect them. She's silent, so I say, Mama, he could have killed somebody. And she says, hardy, hard, real funny, but just how funny if we ain't laughing. I want to say something in the silence, something funny, but I know my mother wants to be left alone when she pretends to yawn, so I tell her I love her, and I don't remember who hangs up. Somebody. And then the last poem in the book, Dear Moon. When the dark curtains for the bedroom came, I blacked you out like the night you fight in. Forgive me, but I'm still working through it in therapy. Lately, I've been so sudden with my decisions. Cut my braids out of my head a month early, put a deadline on a man's love. I'm leaving space for nothing but blame in the new season, and this here is no different. I never told you about the great hurt between us. Me, 13, and thinking I needed you to speak back to me. Back then, I skipped my wishes to you like stones over water. I slept in the overhang of mornings that relieved your shift. I'm angry. I still don't know what to call the thing between us. Were you friend or sister, the first lover to leave when I became too much? I've surrendered to the half-truth. Men remind me of you. The mixed messages, you in my bed every night, and nothing ever to say of it. My therapist says I'm projecting, but goes silent when I mention that you've been doing it to me my whole life. At night, I get moody and waiting, anxious for you to ask me how I've been, anxious enough to pay someone to ask me now instead. The harder and fuller truth, men have abandoned me and I never heard from you. I was a shadow of a wolf whimpering into your blank light. I didn't know that love was an ancestor of quietude, that you were still there. Of all things, love, I'm still learning.
Them last lines. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, dope. So we're gonna open it up. It's y'all's turn. I done asked a lot. I want to hear what y'all want to know.
Questions.
I love the first person.
Hey,
It's always just,
Natalie.
it's either like, okay.
Yeah.
You know?
Hi,
How did you know? I just have that way.
No,
about
you
me.
grabbed it. You were like, and now it's time. I've been to a lot of readings. I have a list. Yes.
Yes, I indeed do.
I call it.
Okay, so Taylor knows I'm not a poet. I am a prose writer. So I want to ask about form and also about deciding when something is a poem and when something is prose, because you mentioned your new book is a lot of prose. So I guess I want to first start with just talking about form, because I don't actually know what a sestina is, or like I know, like, yes, sestina, it's a form, but like I don't know the rules of it. I also don't know the rules of sonnets, and I sort of know the rules of villanelles. So I'm just curious about like how you think about your reader when the reader probably doesn't know the rules behind forms, or actually can't even recognize forms, right? So like I'm like, oh, that's a sestina. Like I didn't know, So like I guess I don't super have an articulate question here, other than just to think about like, is it important to you that the reader be able to recognize the form, or like know the rules of the form so they can appreciate the rigor in the poem, or like how do you think about that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I actually love when readers come to a formal poem of mine and don't initially know, because I think like there's two different like reading experiences, right? Like as someone who knows the form and recognizes it and is coming into it looking for those things, and then as someone who is just coming to the poem like, oh, this is a poem, and then kind of discovers the really wonderful things that kind of happen, like a pantoum, for example, that has these repeating lines that pop up. A reader just comes and they're like, oh, they're experiencing these repetitions. And I feel like there's an excitement about that, and there's like a different sort of engagement that sort of happens. And I think that happens when in the sestina, when you start to see or notice the repeating words, like there's just a different, I think, reading process. And I love that. And if the reader is like interested and curious enough and goes to do research, then I think they can then have both of those experiences, right? And that experience is then enriched by the knowledge of the form. I think not knowing it allows for a different appreciation of the music of the poem often as well. So I'm thrilled when people come to the page and don't know and maybe find out later. I think they have a really exciting experience and can kind of linger in and enjoy those formal elements without thinking about them as these conventions yet, and just being like, I'm just going to sit in the music of this thing. I'm going to sit in these echoes. So I actually love when that happens.
Yeah, it's interesting because I feel like when you're reading aloud the sestina, I'm noticing the patterns and knowing the repetitions, but I'm like, but what's the code? And I'm like, and now I want to go back and like figure it out,
I always think there's two potentialities for rigor. Like there's the approach of the poem from someone who understands form, and they get to measure, it's all biased, but they get to measure how like the satisfaction of the success of the execution of the form, or the subversion of the form, whichever your goal is. And then there's the reader who maybe doesn't recognize it, and they get to experience what that form may offer a poem, even if you don't recognize. They get to, what the repetition does for the mouth when you read it out loud, or the mind if you're, what the music there, and also like the satisfaction of like what the author was intending to use that form for. You still get to experience it, even if you don't know that that's what's happening.
Yeah, I think that's why I was like, I really want to learn the forms, because I know that Taylor is probably upending and subverting forms in really interesting way. But if I don't know the form, then I also can't appreciate that. So I'm like, okay, got to study up.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I like that the book makes you want to do that.
Yeah, it absolutely does. But I'll let someone else ask a question, but if no one does, you can maybe answer the question about prose.
Oh yeah. I did focus on the form. I mean, I can ask about prose. So I was a fiction writer first. I was, undergrad fiction. And I think as a result, I'm a very heavy narrative writer. I think also it fosters, I think, a world building attention that I think doesn't necessarily, or it isn't always inherent, I think, to poetry. But deciding whether something needs to be a poem or whether it needs to be prose, I think it comes down to the sort of music that it requires. And I think it depends on how much like ambiguity I can like sort of leave my reader with. I think like poems, I feel more comfortable letting my reader do a little bit more work and leaving things a little more open. I think with prose, when I feel like, okay, I gotta like kind of offer a lot more, I gotta give a lot more context. This feels like something that is gonna be more dense, something that requires, I think, a little bit more labor. That's typically where I will go to prose. If I feel like I can tell the story, if I can execute the thing, and not be as like explain a lot of things, then we go for the poems. But the line is thin sometimes.
Yeah.
The line is thin sometimes. Like the absolutely. And a lot of my, my second book, which is a lot of prose, like the first poem right now, my editor might be like, no. But the first poem is like this sort of poem essay that started off kind of like longer, but is now in these like fragments of like very short prose pieces. And so, yeah, sometimes I'm like, okay, I actually don't need the cutting, right? Going back to the cutting, I was like, okay, I can get away with a lot less. So I think that's the biggest question of like, how much can I get away with telling? If I have to tell more, it's probably going to be a longer form. If I can get away with really getting down to the nitty gritty of the language, it's probably going to be a poem.
Do we have other poems, other questions?
Yeah, do you have other poems in the audience?
Thanks so much. I love that you mentioned that you started out as a fiction writer.
Yeah.
And I'm a fiction writer. And I also was just wondering about how that continues to impact you as a writer and your relationship to the fictionalizing impulse.
Yeah.
And like when that comes in, if you feel it in first drafts, if it comes in later drafts, or how you like listen to that.
It absolutely comes in first drafts. And I think it comes in just the way that I observe the world. Like, in fiction, there's like setting. Setting is a thing. And that's not necessarily a thing in poems. Like, we don't need a setting.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of times I want to and sort of have an impulse always to build some sort of like world a reader can step into. And that follows me everywhere. And it's very hard to get rid of. I think also, as a fiction writer, what kind of switched me over to poetry was I took an ekphrastic poetry class. And ekphrastic poetry is poetry that's inspired by visual art. And what was so appealing about that was like, oh, I'm looking at a thing and I get to make up a story about it. And so my love for ekphrasis continues, but I think also just the way that visual inspiration finds its way into my work. Like, that Beyoncé poem that I mentioned earlier, it has like bits and pieces of, Beyonce's music video and talks a lot about what's actually happening in the video, things of that nature. So I think also just those visual influences always find their way in as well. So I think those are the two main ways that fiction background continue to influence my writing. It's a great question. Thank you.
We maybe have time for 2 more, 3 more.
Hi, Edith.
Hello.
I want to circle back to the part about writing about living people in our lives.
Yeah, let's talk about it.
Yeah. So I guess it brought me back to kind of my poems and kind of like how there are things you need to say, like to get out of your body, but there's the question, am I right to say this where someone can hear me? So I kind of want to ask, did you pull any punches?
Did I pull any punches? I have pulled some punches. I think when writing those hard pieces in that way, I used to have a really wonderful nonfiction teacher who used to say, write it hot, edit it cold. And what she meant by that was like, you know, write it when it feels, you know, hot in the body, when it's like really close to you, and get all the punches out and write it, and come back to it when you're like a little more emotionally distant and you can kind of see it more objectively, and maybe see where those punches are. So that was one part of just kind of like writing it, getting it out of the system, saying what you need to say, because, you know, before it comes out into the world, you have every right to do that, and you still have the right to do that if it goes out in the world, but especially there in your personal space, you can write it however you need to write it, and then you can kind of come back later and see. I think it also was just, it depends on the relationship too. Like if these are people that you still have like a good relationship with, sometimes there's a conversation that you can have on the front end. You know, you can sit down and say like, I've written this. It talks about these things, get their insight. But if that's not something you want to do, not something that I did, the question that I asked myself was, you got to decide the price that's worth paying. And you have to decide what can stay here and go out into the world, and potentially come back to you that you would be okay with, and that you wouldn't regret. And I think that's a question that you have to kind of sit with before sending something out into the world, deciding like how high that cost is.
Any more questions? We have questions from folks joining us in the virtual space.
Are there any other sort of cultural touchstones like The Wiz or Beyonce that you want to explore that you haven't gotten to explore?
Ooh, I love that question.
So a lot of the second book has heavily influenced by art, like museum art, going to the museums, looking at the paintings by some of our most famous and terrible as people artists, and sort of exploring the complicated nature of like the art that we love, and the artist that was like, you know, doing terrible things in real time. So that's a project that's really exciting. Getting to spend some more time with visual art, going back to my roots of ekphrastic poetry. I'm really excited about that. And I'm writing a love book now.
That's how I feel.
Yeah. It's been an interesting project. You know, a lot of this book, you know, my dad gets a lot of space in this book, and I find that my mom is now like showing up in a lot of my poems. I think it's time to write the mom poems, which I'm both excited about and a little terrified, because me and my mom are very close. But I also am very fortunate to have a relationship where she reads everything that I write, but goes into everything that I write knowing that my experiences are different from hers, and she respects and honors those. And so, yeah, those are the things that are showing up in the work now that I'm excited about.
There's a great book called Monsters, if you haven't read it yet. It's about the subjectivity of being an art fan and how we deal with that, and particularly the art of terrible, mostly men, handful of women.
Yeah, I get it. Mostly men.
Yeah, I think we maybe have time for one more.
Yeah,
we got one more. We got one more question. That was such a best friend.
Yeah,
not even a little. No.
Well,
one more question. Okay, cool.
I think we're great. I want to say thank you to our friends watching virtually, and remind you that you can click this teal button at the bottom center of the screen to buy a Done Click My Heels 3 times from Charis. It really does help us when you buy event books from us. So thank you for being with us tonight. We're going to say goodbye to you.